Just so everyone's aware, we are recording right now.
Yeah.
Shh.
I'm eating them.
Senior Kenny, would you like to take it over?
It was just green. There it is.
Okay, call the meeting to order. It went off again.
No, it's on.
Oh, okay. Roll call.
Mayor Mahler,
Present.
Counselor Gerson, Counselor Gorley. Here. Counselor Trask,
Here.
Counselor Coleman,
Present.
Counselor Richards,
Present.
Counselor Sanchez,
Here.
Bob Brianna, David Lohman, Chairman Hamlin.
Present.
Hey, Dave, make sure your light's on. Yeah.
There you go.
We're supposed to have it on green all time.
Okay. Do we have a reading of the minutes?
The minutes were part of the packet. We don't typically read them, but we can.
Did everybody read the minutes of our last meeting? We better read them.
I was going to apologize. It doesn't appear that the minutes were part of the packet. So we will, I'd ask the chair if you would allow us to include those in the next packet.
So well, we can do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess we can start with the review and the discussion.
I think this is where I get to talk a lot. Okay, so the first of our kind of detailed budget meetings, we are going to cover the internal service fund as a whole. Typically, most of these are going to be done by department, but we specifically section out internal service fund. We know there's certainly questions about it from everybody. We want to make sure that it's transparent and allow you to ask any questions that you have about that fund. So we're going to cover the internal service fund, and then we'll get into the department presentations. Blair Larson, the Community and Economic Development Director, will be first on the docket. He's just finding this out now. I will follow up with finance, and then Public Works will bring up the last of the presentations for today. So before I get started, are there any questions that you may have for me or anybody else? All right, one change to notify you of, and the thanks and credit goes to Councillor Coleman on this one. On page 103 of your budget document, apparently we somehow managed to squeak in $71,000 for electricity. We don't need that much. That on page 103, that section is talking specifically about water distribution. Water distribution doesn't have a lot of electricity. They essentially share electricity costs with the 3 other public works divisions for the public works yard. We would request only $7,000 in electricity costs in that line. So if you could modify that from 71,000 to 7,000, we would greatly appreciate that. Beyond that, I'm not aware of other changes that need to be made, but certainly if you have questions or concerns about anything in the document, please be sure to bring it up with us or during some department presentations.
Would that appear also a second time in here somewhere in the fund?
Likely, yes. I don't know what page number off the top of my head, although I could open the document too. I will get that other page number for you when Blair's presenting and make sure you get it. But yes, that number will likely show up one other spot as well. All right. With that said, we'll roll right into the internal service funds. For the 7 counselors, I just want to make sure you see the PowerPoint presentation on the screen in front of you. Is that correct? Awesome. Okay. Internal service funds. So the biggest question is, what is an internal service fund, or what are internal services? So I've got 2 definitions up on the screen for you. Internal services are those responsibilities a government provides to support its own internal operations. That definition is from the Government Finance Officers Association. It is listed as a best practice. It is also to account for the financing of goods or services provided by one department to another department of the governmental unit on a cost reimbursement basis. That's a lot of legal jargon for we share costs for various internal functions of our entity. And that one is out of the Oregon Administrative Rules. A question in the past has been, has the city used this philosophy in the past? The answer to that is yes. Specifically, it has been used across all of our non-general fund departments to fund certain services. And so this example here that you can see on the screen is a copy of the 1992-93 budget. It is a copy of the general fund budget showing the administrative charges down at the bottom and includes the state gas tax fund, water, wastewater, the public safety levy, the library levy, and I can't read that last one.
We can't either.
Yeah.
Central
Thank you.
garage.
Central garage. Why did we stop? So one of the questions of the past is there was a time period for which the city did not collect administrative charges, specifically from the police department and the library, in the probably early 2000s until 2019. 2019 was the first year that we had the internal service charges back for those 2 departments. It's not, the short answer is we didn't stop. Yes, it is true we did not collect funds from those 2 organizations, but we continued to collect administrative charges from all of the public works divisions. The biggest reason for that was essentially a council decision and a budget committee decision in the past, because the police department and the library had financial struggles. So especially right around the time that the housing market kind of fell apart in 2008. Property tax revenue for those 2 organizations was not what we had hoped. And the decision at the time was that the best way to support those departments and to ensure their continued operating success would be to forego those administrative charges and have the general fund pick it up. So that was essentially the general fund, the city's contribution to those 2 departments to keep them functional. We are in a position now where that can resume. It has been happening now for the last 2 fiscal years. Oh, nope. I guess just last year. So 2020 was the first year. My apologies. We have gone through our 2020 audit. There were no deficiencies related to the internal service fund. There were no audit notes related to that fund. So we are confident that certainly the legality of the matter is that we are allowed to do this according to legal guidelines. But certainly from a philosophical point, that's a discussion for the budget committee and the city council to determine, is this how we want to function? So that part I can't answer. So in Sweet Home, how does this work? So the internal service charges covers expenditures for specific departments. Those include the executive department, that's the city manager's office, finance, information technology or IT has been added to this list. That is new, and we will cover that in a little bit. It covers legislative or the city council and public works. Charges to various departments are split by number of employees or total expenditures, and I have some graphics to outline what that will look like. So on this spreadsheet, this is the kind of the cost allocation methodology that we use. This top section includes the executive and legislative representation, is what it says. That includes the city manager, the administrative assistant, and the city council's pay. The second line is the materials and services that is budgeted for that department at $44,000. And then what is new this year to this spreadsheet is the IT personnel and materials. What I can tell you is that's just personnel. That is the cost for the salary and the benefits for that full-time IT person. There is no other materials cost included in that. The biggest reason for that is certainly as computers are purchased, the departments will pay for their own computers as necessary. And so those charges will be allocated specifically to the departments. But the administration and the salary for the person will remain in this fund to be spread across all of the organizations. The color coding that you see on here, the blue line indicates that the charges are allocated to departments based on an HR calculation. So at the top of the screen, you see total number of employees is 57. And then we've gone through and allocated out how many people are in each of those different organizations or departments. And then a percentage is calculated based on that. So in this case, the 466,000 for that department, executive and legislative, 38.6% is allocated to the police department based on their staff. 7% is allocated to the library and nearly 25% to public works. The general fund also does contribute to this fund because there are departments in the general fund. So nearly 30% of the total cost for this department is allocated to the general fund. The second section drops into non-departmental and general services. So we have some items that we have tried to put some offsetting revenues into this fund to help alleviate some of the money that the departments have to pay. So we have taken franchise fees, specifically our Northwest Natural, cable TV, telephone, sanitation franchise fees, and put them into this fund. And so those are allocated out on a expenditure basis. The finance department also has some functions that receive specific fees for their services. Specifically, those are passports and liens. We generate about $25,000 a year in passports and lien search fees. And so that funding has also been placed into this fund. That is new for this year because we inadvertently left that in the general fund last year. So we've moved that over here again to offset the total expenditures necessary for the departments to cover. Expenditures that are listed as non-departmental, so items that don't really have a department to fit into, the services of the city attorney, our communications staff, and associated materials and service software, items necessary to fund communications in the city. The website and meeting management is in here, our meeting management tool. This row is green and is allocated on an equal basis. So we take 4 different groupings: police, library, public works, and general fund, and divide the total expenditures for this line by 4. Because everybody uses that equally, basically. Our auditing charges are in here. Ordinances is the same way. It is divided equally amongst the 4 groups. We do always, in all of our funds that have personnel, allow for a contingency. That is city policy. And so that contingency line is here as well. The total you'll see down there at the bottom says a negative 42,554. The reason for that is you have a little over, probably right around $250,000 in revenue that's offsetting this overall grouping. So it didn't need as much of it. It had a net surplus to these departments. Utility billing is the next section. These splits are a little bit different based on changes to the finance department, which we will cover in the finance presentation. But the utility billing costs are allocated solely to public works. So the police department, the library, and the general fund do not pay anything for the utility billing services out of the finance office. And you can see that on the right-hand side, they're only allocated to water and wastewater.
What pages are these, Brandon?
Uh,
I mean, we're supposed to get these so I can see it. I can't see this.
This specific spreadsheet is not in your book. We can certainly print it if you would like to have it on hand, but the actual dollar figures are in your book, but this spreadsheet is not. Questions about this stuff so far? And that screen's blank.
Can we turn this TV on over here?
Yes. Ray, do you have the remote for that one? Is it not working? It might not be working.
Okay.
Nope, I cannot turn that TV on.
Okay.
So I guess these are your screens for the moment, plus the one in front of the council. Yeah, you could pop over here if you wanted to. All right, page 2 of this covers additional finance costs. So there are some functions that are utility billing, and then certainly finance has other charges that go along with it. So these are the remaining expenditures for the finance department. Those are allocated in 2 separate manners. One is for payroll costs, and the other is for the cost associated with printing and paying for the city's accounts payable, their bills. So those charges are on the screen there. There are bank charges that the city incurs, budgeted this year at $56,100. The police department does not pay the bank charges because they don't accept credit cards for their processing. So as you'll see here in that middle column there, the police department does not have an allocation for this component. The last line at the bottom, Public Works Administration, those charges are for kind of the central functions of Public Works, the administrative functions in Public Works, which include the director, an engineering technician 2, an administrative assistant, and an operations manager, and a mechanic. So those 5 people are funded in the internal service fund and spread across the public works departments based on total expenditure dollars. So as we're going through all of these departments and all the budgets, what you will see in each of these areas are 2 lines in the materials and service section in the materials and service grouping of their budgets. One is for administrative service charges and one is for finance service charges. So we basically refer to this. So the total admin costs is what those administrative cost recoveries are based on. And then certainly the total finance costs includes the finance service charges. This is a high level overview. I can answer questions if you have them about the specific figures in here. or kind of the methodology, or we can talk about how it's put together. But certainly as we're going through the department budgets, again, you'll have all of that information in those. So at least you have a general idea of how those allocations are processed. Questions for me? Okay. Then I will turn this microphone over to Blair so that he can present his department.
Any farther? Brandon, I'm sorry. I should have jumped up ahead because I'm gonna ask this question during the whole thing.
Okay.
I kind of broke down all the wages, and I know you guys probably deserve your wages. It seems like wages are going up 5%. Inflation's not going up. Nobody's making any more money. I don't know how your negotiations go with your unions and such.
So,
But a few of these situations where I went through each one of the departments, and it seems like, I know, for instance, in the water department, the finance department, in your department, the number of people working in there with compensation and pay, it's almost like each person's making $100,000 a year.
sure.
And
So,
so you're gonna tell me, in being in business, the hardest thing ever is your labor cost. Right?
Right.
So explain it to me.
sure. So first off, none of our staff is getting 5%, at least not from a cost of living adjustment. So what I can say is that some of the departments have reorganization items in their budget. So for example, mine, which we'll cover when we get to me, but I do have one staff member whose job is being reclassified to an accounting technician instead of a utility billing clerk. So that increase for that individual is likely higher than a standard cost of living adjustment because there's an additional component to that. The water department is seeing increase in the total salaries because we have restored the dollars for one FTE that at the height of the COVID pandemic last year, we had temporarily removed until we knew what the circumstances were going to look like. Everything in this budget is for personnel is budgeted at a 3% increase, and that is in line with what contracts require. Some of our contracts are based on CPI adjustments. And so when we get to that point at which we determine what those increases are going to be, it could be less than 3%. But what we've put into this budget document is 3% for cost of living adjustments for personnel.
I just noticed, when I was reading this, when expenditures, and you even said yourself that payroll is going to go up and up and up and
Sure.
up, and you thought it was going to become a problem sooner or later.
It is.
That's why I brought
Right.
the question.
And
up.
yes, that is always something that a public agency has to fight with, is the fact that the biggest component of a city budget or any municipality, local government budget is personnel, because it is personnel driven. Everything we do requires people. Certainly the police department, cops and the personnel budget in the police department is their primary component of their budget because that's how their department operates. Finance is heavy personnel intensive, but we are a lean organization. Certainly there are cities our size and our budget size that have additional FTEs in their city. We operate at the lowest level that we think we can get away with and still be able to provide the essential functions that residents of the city of Sweet Home and businesses have come to expect from our organization. You won't see any personnel fluff in here, I can tell you that. And certainly, I think all of our departments would tell you they could use more people. They could use more people to do more work for what we're trying to accomplish.
They'd probably tell you they could use a raise too.
Well, they'd probably tell you that too. And certainly, wages are what they are. We do a salary study. We did a salary study last year, I think, but for all of our union contracts and for our non-represented staff, which includes upper management, to ensure that our salaries are in line with our comparable cities. And then we even knock 5% off of the top of those. So certainly nobody here in none of these departments are going to tell you they couldn't do more work with more people. They all will tell you that they could use more people.
Sure.
But we try to keep personnel lean and mean, so to speak, to keep those costs down.
Mr. Chair, if I could. One thing I just want to remind everybody that we've got to make sure the microphones are directional. So we need to make sure that we're leaning forward a little bit and speaking into them so members of the public that are joining us online can hear. If I could add to that, Mr. Brianna, when I arrived 4.5 years ago, we were well over 60 full-time employees, and we're now down to about 57. So we are leaner than we were 5 years ago. And all members of the AFSCME unit, bargaining unit, and all members of management are non-represented are a minimum of 5% below comparables. And it's just what we do kind of as employees part to help keep costs down. And the unions have agreed to that in order to help us better serve and be more efficient to the public. So it's something that we do, and AFSCME and management do that voluntarily.
Well, that's why I asked the question, because I don't understand how the
Yeah.
unions work and how things work.
Mhm.
And I just noticed by what his statement said, and down the road, wages are going to affect our
Absolutely.
bottom line. So I just thought I'd bring it up at the beginning and let it go.
The other thing that we that we also do though, and Brandon spoke to that, is we work to reward our employees when they take on extra responsibilities. So the fact that we've cut down by several employees means someone's picking up that work. And so we have several employees that we have promoted essentially because they've shown that dedication and they deserve that. So, and that's what Brandon was talking about. We have a couple that we'll go through that that we're promoting or changing their classifications in order to justly, at least in our mind, justly compensate them for what they're doing.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to address something too. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the staff did not take a rate increase in January. Is that when that happened?
July.
July. And so they didn't have to do that, but they waived that increase. And I think, did some of the union folks do that too? Or other?
For most of the non-reps, all of the department heads and all of AFSCME bargaining unit
Yeah.
voluntarily gave up their
Yeah.
cost of living increase.
All right. Thanks.
If there are no other questions, I will turn it over to Blair.
Good evening, committee members and counselors. Can you hear me okay? All right, so my name is Blair Larson. I am the Community and Economic Development Director. Community Economic Development. Sorry, I'm getting the hang of my controls here. In my presentation, first we'll talk about the structure of the department. We'll go over our statistical report from 2020. We'll talk about briefly talk about our current performance measurements. We're going to talk about department goals, some of the things that we've accomplished and things that we're working on. And then finally, we talked about some of the budget requests that are different this year as opposed to previous years. There's not a lot that's really different in my department, and so, but we'll talk about those. So first of all, there's myself, the director, at the head. The blue, we have our Angela Clegg, our associate planner, who also supervises Molly Laycock, our building permit technician. Joe Grable is our staff engineer, and Ethan Rowe is our, it says code enforcement officer. We're actually rebranding that to code compliance officer to focus on what we're really after with that department, that's compliance. We also have two contracts that do a significant amount of work for us. One is Northwest Code Professionals. That's our building official and building inspector. The city a while back used to have their own building inspector. However, this contract has allowed us to be, I think, leaner and more responsive. Essentially, Northwest Code Professionals is a larger organization, number of very qualified personnel. We have one that is essentially assigned to us most of the time, and then when that inspector is not available, others stand. But it also means that if there's somebody if there's a specialty that's needed, they can call in somebody that is very qualified to deal with that. The great thing is that it's really development driven. We pay for what we use. We don't pay more than that. And so if we had our own inspector, we'd be more subject to the ebbs and flows of the building industry. And so in lean years, when there's not much building activity, we would have high expenses for the amount of compared to the amount of fees that we'd be bringing in. Whereas in good years, like now, we'd have that inspector overloaded with work, and we'd be wondering whether we needed to hire somebody else. So fortunately, with this contract, it allows us to scale up and down as needed. We also have a planning contract with the Cascades West Council of Governments. That is a couple years old now, that contract. Essentially, it's an agreement that, and again, we pay as we use, but we use planning personnel from the Cascades West Council of Governments as needed. This was more necessary previously than it is now. Angela Clegg, our associate planner, is when she started, she did not have much or any planning experience. And then as she has learned, as she has gained experience and gained expertise, we have decreased our use of that contract. And so in prior years, it was a larger expense. Now it's actually declining significantly because we are very careful about how we use that contract and what we ask the COG to do. Typically, now our usage is when there are significant projects that we don't have any experience in, or that's a question that we're not that we haven't encountered before, we'll call in the COG and get their input and get some assistance there. But most of our activities don't require that anymore because of the training and experience that our staff have gained. So that is our structure. Any questions on that?
Actually, there, I do have a question.
Yeah.
So in looking at the budget, then the budget for professional services includes this Northwest Code Professionals and Cascade West, right?
That is correct. And that's the main, later in my presentation, we'll be talking about that particular line, that line in particular, because that's one of the only areas of our department budget that really is, it's the largest materials and services part of our budget, and it's pretty much the only real thing that can be adjusted. Everything else is pretty much, I mean, the other things can be adjusted certainly, but everything else is kind of staff support materials, printing costs, and things like that. The real meat of our budget is either personnel or that professional services line. But go on, I interrupted.
Well, the reason why I'm asking is because it shows a 2.5% decrease, right? But you're saying that we're going to rely upon Cascade West less? Only 2.5% is not much less.
Right. That's because there are many other things that are covered in that line as well.
Oh, okay.
So we'll get to that in more detail.
Okay,
But
sorry.
Any other questions? All right, so this is our statistical report for 2020. The council will recognize this. It was presented in their council training, but to give the rest of the budget committee kind of an idea of our operations. Code enforcement in 2020 closed 352 cases across 15 enforcement categories. The most common was tall grass and weeds. The most labor intensive were occupied RVs. Planning activities, we had 44 planning actions over 7 permit categories, 11 planning commission meetings. That will be increasing this year, definitely, and I'll go into why later. Most common were property line adjustments. Building activity, we had 274 building permits over 12 permit types, 1,521 building inspections, total job valuation was around 15 million. On the engineering side of things, we had 105 public right-of-way permits, 28 system development connections. Parks, events, and projects is also something handled in my department. Angela Clegg, our associate planner, deals with most of those. We had 6 park and tree committee meetings, 4 special events, and staff put in about 1,000 hours on the Sankey Park improvements. And on the economic development side of things, we had 7 SEEP projects funded. The SEEP is the Commercial Exterior Improvement Program. We likely will beat that this year. And then 11 entrepreneurs were assisted through our relationship with RAIN, Oregon RAIN. RAIN stands for Regional Accelerator and Innovation Network. It's a entrepreneurial assistance program. So some of the things that we track, and we don't have to go into these in detail, but it's mostly just to give you an idea of our department and what we do. Here you can see some of the building division performance measures. We track the type of permit, such as residential dwellings, demolitions. Manufactured dwellings are handled differently than single-family homes or regular stick-built homes. We also have mechanical permits and plumbing permits and site development fees. On the commercial side, we have all those same things as well, but it kind of gives you a picture of how many we typically get. The permits that we charge are based on valuation through some formulas that the state, it's governed by state statute, but there's tables that we use that are put out by the state that kind of help us know what fee should be charged for what type of job, and there's a number of factors that go into that. Of those fees that we collect, there is a good portion that goes to the state, 12%, I believe. And so, but the program does pay for itself. The fees that we collect pay for our building permit technician and pay for our contract with our Northwest Code professional. On the planning side, things are a lot less sexy on planning because the numbers are smaller and we don't collect as much, but you can see there we track annexations, code amendments, conditional use permits, partitions, plan developments, property line adjustments, street vacations and variances, and zoning map amendment. We also kind of on a monthly basis keep tabs on how many applications we're getting and how many are approved and how many are pending. And then we also handle fence permit. On the code enforcement side of things, we keep track of our overall cases. We have started dividing out the complaints by complaints from the public and officer detected violations, and so we split that up. But those are the number of complaints, and then below you can see the different types. We split those off into what type of violation we're dealing with, and then we also track how many open cases we have at any given month. So as you can see for April, having 13 new cases, but at the end of the period we had 21 at the end because we resolved 12. So that's a little bit about that. Our engineering division is a little bit more difficult, and so is economic development. There's not as many measurements for that. It tends to be project based, and so we report to the council the status of various projects. We can add more if, and we're kind of looking at what performance measures would make sense to report more on a regular basis, such as system development charges and our right-of-way permits, and of course our grant. Oregon RAIN, that we will go into that contract or that budget allocation later, but they provide a report of their activities every 6 months. So some of the things that we're working on and have completed, this is organized by council goal. Under goal 1 in infrastructure, we recently finished updating our system development charges. That was a significant project, and we appreciate the council's cooperation with that, those were adopted and are in effect now as of May 1st. Sankey Park is, the improvements there are nearly complete. We just have some more paths that need to be paved and some work that Public Works is finishing up, and some additional lighting that'll be installed, but it's going very well. We're quite pleased with that. And we have now started planning efforts for Upper Sankey, started getting out in the park, talking to the public to see what, we have a substantial amount of land up on that upper part that the BMX track is there now, but there's a lot of potential for additional improvements to bring that in line with the rest of Sankey Park. And we'll be looking for additional grant funding and other opportunities with once those improvements are identified that the public would like. Under Goal 2, Effective and Efficient Government, we are updating our development code. This has been a long-term goal and a long-term project. It is progressing. A draft is now being considered by the Planning Commission. That's why I mentioned that we'd be having more planning commissions than last year, because the Planning Commission has now doubled the amount of meetings that they're holding. They used to just meet once a month. Now we're meeting twice so that they can get through that development code. We've only had one meeting so far that was solely devoted to going over the development code, and it was a doozy, and having been through that one, it's gonna take a while. So I'm hopeful that we can be done with the review by the end of the year, but we'll see how fast people read and how much people talk. That's kind of what it depends on at this point. But once they're done, that will be followed by public hearings to get additional input from the public and also bring it to the City Council. We are slowly doing a systems analysis in my department and we've mapped out most of our common department tasks, and we'll be analyzing them to look for possible improvements and efficiencies. This is getting tied into some efforts we're doing right now because we are losing an employee to retirement. And so we're using this process to kind of make sure that everything is well prepared for the replacement of that employee. And because we will not likely be able to have somebody on board before it's our building permit technician is retiring, and so we will likely not have a new person hired before then. So it's important to have all this information down for continuity purposes, but it also gives us an opportunity to kind of look at things very carefully to ensure that we're doing things the most efficiently, and that we're also doing things the most as seamless as possible from the perspective of the customer. Other goals that are not yet started. The Planning Commission has indicated a desire for an updated comprehensive plan, and then we also have yet to start a staff development and training plan. Under Goal 3, Essential Services, one of the goals is to increase access to quality healthcare services. We're doing our best to support that through development code improvements and assisting with seeking private partners on that. One of the things that our current development code is that any kind of health facility, any doctor's office, any clinic, they're all conditional uses, which means they have to go before the Planning Commission. And it really makes sense to me that in commercial areas we think that we should be able to have those as an outright permitted use to decrease the burden on somebody putting something like that in. So we're hoping to get that changed in our development code through that code overhaul. Goal 4, economic strength. As you can see, there's a number of things we're working on. One of the goals is to implement business vitalization programs. We are working with the chamber on creating a getting into business guide, as well as a voluntary business registration. Recently, the council passed a new ordinance targeting vacant buildings, and so enforcement of that is now underway, and we're beginning to get some compliance with that. Another goal is to lead community economic development efforts. Recently, the the council has increased the grant levels for our commercial exterior improvement program, and we've updated the forms in line with that and are trying to get the word out as much as we can. In addition, plans with Quarry Park, which is one name that we've given to the city-owned property that's the former Knife River Quarry and future home of the Jamboree. We are continuing to work on that. That's a very long-term project. There's a long-term vision for it, and things are starting to coalesce with actually making progress, but it's still going to be a long, hard slog getting that to what we want it to be. And then we do own a building that is currently occupied by a local business that the original purpose of that building was to be a kind of an incubator space. And one of the goals we have is getting that, the policies kind of tightened up on that to make it back into what it was originally going to be. It's been occupied by the same business for a significant amount of time. And so we need to try to make sure we find them a home, but also get the facility back to where it should be. So that's a long-term effort as well. We continue, of course, to work with our regional partners, SHEDIG, the Chamber, various groups in Lynn County, Oregon Rain, and MVP is the Mid-Valley Partnership. That's a group of 8 cities that we have joined with, that we have similar interests in, that we're all smaller than Corvallis and Albany. And so we have kind of joined together trying to get more economic development attention to our cities instead of just the big cities. And that's a long-term project as well. One of the goals was to develop a downtown streetscape plan. We've started on that. Consultants have started work, and we held our first community meeting, and they're kind of distilling all of the comments that they got from that community meeting from some of the online efforts that we had to gather input. And I have a meeting with them on Monday to kind of go over some of the things that they've learned and get to the next stage of that. Other goals that have not yet started, we would like to create a more clear business information web portal so that we can just have, something like business.sweethome.or.gov or something like that, an easy place where people can go and get everything, all the information they need on either starting a business or getting the resources that their business needs in Sweet Home, specifically directed towards Sweet Home. There are lots of resources throughout the state and the county and so forth, but we really want to make sure that there's stuff that's directed strictly at Sweet Home. And it's going to, by necessity, it will contain a lot of links to other sources at the state and so forth. But the key is that we want it to be adapted to the needs of our people. And so that's a goal that we have, as well as we've talked among the council of having more of a marketing. There's a goal for marketing the city, and so there's definitely an economic development angle on that. And that's a long-term thing that will be worked on in the next year. Okay, so as I mentioned, our budget is, has been talked about earlier. It's largely personnel heavy. We're not proposing any changes in personnel for the department. And so the only real areas to discuss that are any different from previous years is our materials and services budget. And within that, most of that budget, most of the budget lines are things supporting our work, supporting our staff. They're rather not really very big, but professional services and special events are the real meat of our budget this year. So first of all, we mentioned the professional services line. There's a number of things that are within that, and so this slide kind of outlines where that 136,500 comes from. That is down from 140,000 that was budgeted this year for this line. The reason it's down mainly is because different projects have ended, and our use of some contracts has decreased. So the building official and inspector contract with Northwest Code Professionals, that's pretty much staying around the same. 63,000 is about what we're expecting for that in the coming year. Planning contract, we've kind of decreased our expectation with that and assumed that 20,000 should do it for that contract. It'll probably be a less than that, but that's we're trying to make sure that we're not surprised by something unusual, because with all of the building activity and potential that we have here, we may come across something unusual that we don't have the experience to deal with, and so we want to make sure that we are well prepared to get the assistance of the COG. Our development code update is continuing. We expect that the remaining cost of that is about $10,000. This year, this is the one thing that's really new, is that we would like to hire a RARE student to do a Parks Master Plan. RARE stands for Resource Assistance for Rural Environments. It's run through the University of Oregon, and it's part of the AmeriCorps program. Essentially, what it is it's getting a graduate student for 11 months, and the city pays a flat $23,500 for an employee for 11 months. The student gets assistance through the university, gets mentors, and gets they have a stipend that is contributed through the university. And so it's actually really quite a good deal for a city, because you often get a fantastic employee for a temporary amount of time that can focus on very specific projects, but get exposed to a lot of aspects of municipal government. It certainly builds goodwill also, and provides that experience for that graduate student who will go on to work who knows where within the state. But I myself have not worked in this program in the past, because where I was before in Stanfield, we actually were so poor that we couldn't afford it. But every city that has hosted a RARE student has raved about the assistance that it's brought to their community for a very attractive price. And so we have applied for that already. It's contingent, of course, upon the budget, and we're being considered by the program for that. We should find out, I believe tomorrow, actually, whether we're moving on to the next phase of their selection. So it's not something where we will get it just because we budget for it. We will get it if we budget for it and if we are selected. So, but the reason we've identified Parks Master Plan for that student to work on is that our current Parks Master Plan is rather light on detail. We don't have identified amenities that every park of a certain type should have. We don't have any standards for how long, for example, how far someone should have to walk to get to a city park. We don't have beyond the most detail we have on where any new parks should go is that we need something on the east side, and it doesn't go into any real detail beyond that. And so what we're really looking for is the other problem I should say is that the last time we updated our Parks Master Plan, if you look at the people who were involved, it was pretty much staff members and the council, and not much public involvement other than that. And so we really need to have a better idea. I mentioned before about the input that we're trying to get for Sankey Park. We've put a lot of effort trying to get that input, and a lot of the improvements that are in the park now that we've recently put in are there because we got that input from the public. And that's really built a lot of goodwill from the public. They've basically seen that, hey, you asked us for our opinion, we gave it to you, and now you're doing it. And so it really goes a long way to showing that we're worthy of the trust that they have given us in funding and donations, and that we've done something with it. And so we would like to expand that to more than just Sankey Park. We don't want just one flagship park in the city. We want every park to be a wonderful place for residents to enjoy. And, you know, granted that costs money, of course, but starting with that plan, starting with those improvements identified is how you get there. And once you have those things identified and planned for, then it opens up opportunities for grants and other things. to move forward. But if you don't have a plan, you're never going to get that stuff. So that's essentially the reason behind that. Finally, the other two items in this budget line, the professional services line, we have a contract with Lynn Benton Community College to contribute to the Small Business Development Center here in town. That's $2,500. That was done last year, I believe the year before, if I'm not mistaken. That amount is not changing. We're still wanting to support that facility being here as a resource for our residents. And then the Oregon RAIN contract. RAIN is like I mentioned before, is an organization dedicated to entrepreneurs and trying to improve the entrepreneurial environment within the city. The contract is actually with the 8 cities that I mentioned, this MVP group. And so we're not the only city that is contributing to that. It's divided up among those 8 cities based on population. And so our share of it is about $7,500. The pandemic, of course, has really made things difficult for promoting and helping entrepreneurs. A lot of their model was dealt with a lot of one-on-one coaching, a lot of in-person meetings, and in-person meetings really went away in the last year. And so they pivoted as much as they could. It's unfortunate the way things worked, but we want to promote that entrepreneurial environment in the future. The good thing about the last year is a lot of grant funding has opened up, and when it comes to the economic recovery, and Oregon RAIN applied for and received a major grant to continue their work in our area. Part of the reason they received that grant was the buy-in from the local communities, including our community. So essentially, our contribution to RAIN, they were able to leverage that to gather more grant funding to increase their activities. And so we're very interested and excited to see what they do in the next year, because they have the funding to accomplish it. So that wraps it up for professional services. The other line that is different this year is we are proposing an increase to the special events budget from $10,000 to $15,000. These special events, especially as things open up post-pandemic, have done amazing things for the city. If any of you attended our Harvest Festival last fall, despite all the rules that we were under and all the restrictions we were under, it attracted a huge number of people, and there were a lot of folks who really raved about what a wonderful experience it was. We had some significant, really awesome partners when it comes to this. There was an organization, it's actually they call themselves the Road Maggots. They started out as a motorcycle club, but they volunteer for all sorts of things. But we got connected with them, and they ran the chili cook-off. They ran a lot of things that were associated with that event, and they had a great time and want to help in the future. They were a great partner, and we're looking forward to partnering with them in the future. As well, we had a fantastic cornhole tournament that was run by a partner organization as well. And so we've been able to build on that event and add more to it. And our hope is to continue to get bigger and better with these events. They do take up a lot of staff time, and they do cost money to put on. But the goodwill among the public that they bring, and the addition that they bring to the quality of life for our residents is really quite impressive. So the Harvest Festival is one aspect. This also would go to movies in the park, and other events that we can put on here in the city. So we'd appreciate your consideration of that, because it is an important part of our quality of life. Finally,
Blair,
I mentioned the Planning Commission had.
Blair?
Yeah.
I got a couple questions and a comment.
Yeah.
We did a survey many years ago, and our University of Oregon sent some students, and and they did a good job, and you can see what how we progressed from where we were to where we are now in some of that stuff that went on. And it cost us $10,000, but they had the thing all over the place. And we had all these things that came up in the parks were because of the people that told us what they wanted. And the Harvest Festival, to me, I think it was about as good as we could have handled with the things that we had to deal with. And you'll see what with the parks. Now, my other question is, way back when you were talking about the SDCs, when did those start? May 1st?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was just from then now to whenever we're going to start charging the fees for what we asked for.
Yes, we had
So-
an increase, and it was divided up across 3 years. So essentially, a third of that increase is where we are now. And then a year from July 1st will be the next step, and then another year after that will get us to where we plan to be.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? Yes.
Well, I can wait until you're done.
Oh, we can, if it's about what we've already talked about, go
Yeah,
ahead.
we've been talking, well, council's been talking about the empty buildings in town for a long time. So you have a plan in motion?
So there is an ordinance that was passed to regulate vacant buildings. Now, we can't force somebody to fill a building because that requires a tenant, that requires a contract, it requires some business to be in there, and that's we're not in the business of forcing someone into business. But the intent behind the vacant building ordinance is mainly one of communication. So there's a registration requirement where if you're the owner of a vacant property, you are obligated to fill out a registration form that gives us essentially information about the property and about who to contact. So you do need to, we need to have a good phone number. We need to have an email address. We need to know who is responsible for the property. The ordinance requires a local presence. That is, if you own the property, but you don't live within, I believe, 35 miles, then you need to tell us somebody who is within that radius to take care of the property, who can respond to any problems. That could be a management company, or it could be a friend or whomever. It just needs to be somebody on record that can respond if there is an emergency, or if there's somebody squatting in it, or any kind of circumstance that might arise with a vacant building. In addition, the ordinance requires basic maintenance. If windows become broken, they need to be repaired within a reasonable time. The property needs to be secured. The property needs to be watertight. Can't have a flooding issue or leaking going on. The intent is to preserve the building stock that we have. But that information from the registration is basically, it helps the city. Periodically we have people contact us who are looking for rentals, who are looking for a space. And if we know who to contact, if we know who to get a hold of for some of these vacant buildings, that often, they're in a situation where they're not bothering to put it on the market, or they're not bothering to put it up for lease, but there are still people who are interested in it. And so we want to be able to connect those dots, especially with people who are owners that are out of town and so forth. So that's the intent behind the ordinance and what it's trying to accomplish. We're still kind of in the initial stages of seeing how effective this is going to be. We've had some initial resistance to filling out the registration form. You can go on, I can point you to it if you'd like to go take a look at what we're asking for. It's really quite minimal, but some folks don't like telling you who they are. So we're doing what we can to step up enforcement of that.
Is it true that in some cities and towns that if you have vacant buildings like that and the landlord refuses or doesn't upkeep and they've been there for more than 2, 3, 4 years, if they start fining them?
I have heard of some efforts to do that. There actually there was a webinar that I attended not long ago that even talked about how at some places having a vacancy tax that they would charge. I'm not sure if that's something. I think that there's probably some legal considerations that go into that, and it may be that in some states that's done and legal, and other states aren't. It hasn't been something that I've looked into, but there have been some that do that. The concern that I have about finding anyone is that you got to make sure it's really targeted at where the problem really is, because if you have someone who owns a building that for whatever reason they're not able to afford the improvements that are necessary to attract the tenant that they need, or that there's just it's not in a location that is desirable to tenants, you don't want to penalize people for something that they're trying to do already. It's kind of like you're kicking them while they're down. So I would be very cautious about that, which is one of the reasons why we started with more of a registration program than to really penalize anyone. But the good thing about the registration program is that, for instance, the commercial exterior improvement program, I still run into people who have no idea what that program is and no idea what the city can help them with. And despite our best efforts to publicize it and make people aware, you can get it out in the newspaper, you can get it out on social media, but it doesn't mean people are actually going to read it. And so the great thing about having that information of who owns the vacant building is it gives us a built-in address list and an advertising base to get out to the word on these different programs. We can say, hey, yeah, you need to register your building. Oh, and by the way, your building is a perfect candidate for our commercial exterior improvement program. Would you like to know more? Oh, and by the way, we can get your property signed up for the police department's voluntary trespass program to keep people, to authorize them to evict people from your property and keep people from squatting there. Are you interested in knowing more? Would you like to have that, be signed up for that? It gives us that pipeline, that connection with those property owners. Because with the tax records that we have otherwise, all you've got is their address, and that might not even be something that they see. It's a PO box somewhere in Nebraska.
Yeah, true. One last question.
Mhm.
We have a lot of building going on, apartments and such.
Mhm.
Do we have any in the future?
Yeah. So Benny, the reporter, was just asking me about this earlier. There are some developments that are going on that are hard to see from the permit applications, but one of the things I can tell you is that we have, as you're probably aware, there's the 48-unit apartment complex that's almost done. That's at 2,500 long. Those are, probably going to be up for occupied quite soon. But there is another apartment complex that's being built right here off of Long, but just adjacent to City Hall. That'll be another 40 units. There's a subdivision that's been approved at about 43rd in Maine or so. That's another, 25 lots for single family homes, plus a possible apartment complex next to it. The Duck Hollow Phase 3 over here has been approved. They're still working through some of the wetlands, and that's another 20 or so lots. The planning commission on Monday just heard about another subdivision at the end of Foothill, and they were proposing 26. I'm thinking they probably won't be able to get quite that many in after we get it approved, but it'll be at least another 20 lots. And so those are some of the big ones, but there's definitely a lot of activity. And it'll be interesting to see how it goes given the cost of materials and everything like that. But our building permit technician has been very busy, and our planning associate planner has been pretty busy getting a lot of applications for planning for property line adjustments and partitions and things like that open up more property. So cool. Yeah, it's exciting. There's a lot of cool stuff going on.
Very good.
Blair, a bunch of people has asked me to bring this question up. Clark Mill Road, that parcel that's not being used right now with the two lakes on it and stuff. Is the city planning to make a park out of that? That's what they were wondering.
Oh, the parcel that's across from Hoy's?
Well, it's all the way down at the end of Clark
with the
Mill
very
Road. It's basically burial. You can't get in it, but walking.
Oh, are you talking about the quarry? That's the former Knife River quarry.
Yeah. Nice.
So that parcel, there is a long-term vision for that land The city owns it. It's planned to be the future home of the Oregon Jamboree. There's a lot going on with that. It's mainly a question of access, getting the access moving. It would likely be access through the county's mill property, the former Weyerhaeuser mill site. And the plan for getting that access in, it's one of our long-term projects of getting it moving. So there will be, we're hoping for a rail crossing. We're hoping for a good sized road going into that property that can handle all of the people that want to come and enjoy the Jamboree. And of course, we're not going to build it just for the Jamboree. We want to make sure that that event is duplicated as much as possible, and that site becomes a draw and a destination for numerous events throughout the year.
Did you have a question, Greg?
I just, we probably want to get back on track.
Yeah. I'm almost done. The last thing I had is I mentioned that the Planning Commission had recommended that our comprehensive plan be updated. In the proposed budget, that was a capital request that was not able to be met. We estimate that it would cost around $30,000. The reason why it's important is the city's comprehensive plan. It's the guiding document that's used in all land use decisions. The last major update was in 2000. There was a minor revision in 2010. And the Planning Commission is concerned about the age of the document. And it's one of the reasons why it's recommended to update documents like this on a regular basis is that it gives the public an opportunity to weigh in. Because the document that we're working on essentially it's the document that guides what the zoning will be in the future for something, and the public hasn't really been able to weigh in on that for quite some time, and so essentially we're operating on what people thought 20 years ago. So that's the concern. And so the reason I include it here is just because that was something the Planning Commission formally voted on, and I wanted to pass on that message that that's something that they feel strongly about. But it's not currently in the proposed budget. So if there's anything you find that's $30,000, we'd appreciate it. But we understand, of course, that this is the way the process goes, and we will continue to seek funding wherever we can to pay for that. And that's all I've got. Any questions?
Okay, no questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
All right, what I handed out was a printed copy of the admin service charge methodology, so that you each had a copy, and didn't have to refer to this lengthy video in the future to look at the numbers. So certainly, again, if you have questions about them, I'm happy to discuss it with you. We can do it in one of these meetings or offline and kind of fill in the committee outside of that. So happy to discuss. We'll move right along to the finance department, and I like to consider the finance department the bread and butter of Sweet Home's operations, because without us and my team, there is no payroll, there's no bill payments, and well, some people will be happy that there's no utility billing as well, but that's a different matter. So, and I'm probably biased. I don't know who gets that one. So just as a general reminder of what finance covers, we do all of the accounting, so everything in our general ledgers. Accounts payable is checks going out the door to pay for all the stuff that Blair just talked about, as well as the other departments, of course. Accounts receivable and utility billing, all the money coming into the city. We handle audit functions in collaboration with our external auditors. We handle this lovely document that you have before you that I know you all loved and enjoying reading. We handle payroll and we handle purchasing. Additionally, what some don't generally know is that the municipal court office is a part of the finance department as well. So a division underneath the finance umbrella. They process citations and complaints. Again, they also have accounts receivable, and they handle some collection efforts as far as specifically court collections for fines not paid. They handle pretrial hearings and trials, issue warrants for FTA's failure to appear and FTC's failure to comply, process DUII diversions, and they coordinate with the municipal court judge. So for all of those functions that the finance office provides, we have one full-time FTE for the director, that's me. I have two essentially mid-level managers that provide oversight for each of those kind of generalized functions. Cindy in my office is currently the accounting supervisor. She has two that work under her, Lacey and Angela, goes by Angie. They provide all of those functions that I listed out as far as finance. So specifically, Lacey focuses on utility billing, and Angie focuses on, well, she has a multitude of functions, but payroll, AP, all of those items. Carol Moffett is our court administrator. She oversees the day-to-day functions in the court office. And then there are two part-time court clerks that work underneath Carol, and those are Ryan and Becky. We talked briefly about some changes that my department has proposed, and you'll see those are included in your proposed budget. Specifically, on the finance side, Cindy's title would change slightly, as well as her job functions. No change in pay. Her responsibilities would shuffle over to more reporting, and this is listed as financial services manager. What we're looking to do is kind of enhance our reporting functions. That is one area that we lack in, and also give the auditors another spot to trace down information and somebody to get into contact with. The biggest change in this budget for the finance side is Lacey's position. This would move to an accounts receivable technician. We're trying to split the office into two sections. One would handle money going out the door. One would handle money coming in the door. This is fairly standard for finance offices, not just in municipalities, but you typically have a group of folks, or in this case, one person that handles cash that is coming in, managing all of that as far as entering it in our system, tracking it, and following it through the system. And then we'd have one person who would handle accounts payable. It's listed there as accounts payable and fixed assets technician. We added fixed assets to that role because as we're processing payments to go out the door, fixed assets is a major component. So you, as the person printing the checks, you see all of those fixed assets, those capital items that then you could record. So it's a kind of a natural progression. That's what we're trying to do is make a natural flow in our office. So we're not having so many people touch various functions of our organization. On the court side, there are no changes. So still the one full-time court administrator and two part-time court clerks. Those part-time court clerks are 0.6 FTE each. So a total of 2.6 FTE for the court staff. All of this, yeah, I'll get to that later. All this can be found in your budget document as far as listing out the positions on page 44. So on page 44 of your document, you can see not only finance, but all of the departments and what the FTEs are, in case you kind of need to follow along in that regard. You can see there the change in my office specifically, and yeah, I can answer questions. So for us, what we have in store, 2021, a lot of what we're looking to do is expand kind of services that we've just really recently begun. So the council several years ago worked on a investment policy that would govern the city's cash portfolio. We're looking to expand that investment portfolio, continue to work with, we have a third party that makes recommendations. Ultimately, all of those are signed off on by the finance director before any investments are made. But we have a very, we are in the beginning of kind of diversifying our pool of investments to ensure stability and try to maximize what we get as far as interest earnings. As you probably know, interest rates are abysmal right now. So for example, we receive 0.6% for each dollar on in our local government investment pool. That's the state's kind of bank account for government organizations. We don't receive much. It's next to nothing. We used at the height of just before COVID, we were up in the 2.75% range, which was super good for us. But it fell in a hurry. So certainly we hope that will rebound at some point, but we are looking outside of government options to try to maximize what we have and what we can return to this community. Recently, we leveraged some additional savings through a bond refunding. So through 2036, we kind of, bond refunding is the same thing as a refinance. So we were able to lower some interest rates on loans that exceeded 2%, some up into the 4% range, down to 1.38%. So certainly COVID in that regard was a benefit to us. And we were able to leverage some additional savings. Those savings are, as part of this budget plan, being instantly thrown into capital, because as you'll see from each of the departments, specifically Public Works, where the debt refinance was completed, there's a need for capital projects. So we're trying to leverage that savings to move our dollars further. We are currently reviewing options for banking services in order to limit the amount of credit card charges that we have. As we've discussed, we are shifting our office duties to better fit the needs of our department and to better serve the departments that we serve. And then we are feverishly working on obtaining funding for the wastewater treatment plant as that project gets closer and closer to fruition and construction slated to begin sometime in the next calendar year. So lots of excitement coming for the finance office, lots of things to focus on. We're very excited for our office, but as well the city as a whole. And I don't have any other changes in my budget really, other than kind of some minor cost increases for specific functions, and then obviously the personnel changes we discussed. So I can answer questions that you may have. Otherwise, we will likely turn this over to Greg Springman, Public Works Director, for his portion of this meeting.
No questions? Thanks, Randall.
Thank you.
You
better.
As much as I can. You're also getting good legal control.
You got this on yet, Brandon? Uh-uh. Well, I just hit it about 10 times.
It's gonna be faster than we thought.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Public Works. We will start with my org chart. There's going to be some changes this year. As you can see, we have some gray boxes, specifically over under the utility manager. As we all been working towards, as of July 1st, the city Public Works will be taking over operations of the wastewater and water treatment plants. We've been working hard to fill those 5 positions. As of
Hey, Greg,
this,
can I, we've got something in the middle of our screen here. You don't have it there on those, but this one has a,
It's an airplane.
What page is this on? Here, I'll find any of it.
thank you.
On page 96.
96? Thank you.
all right. So we were talking about our water and wastewater treatment plant. We've been talking about Jacobs probably for about 1.5 years. I don't know if we need to go that far back, but we had a directive to go ahead and take back those services. We have worked hard to fly those positions this last few months. As of this week, we have all of those positions filled, except one. We're close to filling those. And the way it's going to work out is we have 3 individuals internally that will be moving over to those plants. We're going to have a couple individuals from outside. So now we begin our work of filling our vacant spots in Public Works. If you look over on that side of the chart, you see there's a vacant crew leader position that has recently been underfilled, and we have Wesley Glenn overseeing collections. So those departments are full. We did hire a new in the vacant and the water distribution system. We hired a new employee there. And so we're whole in those 2 divisions. We still have a vacant streets position, but because of COVID and some of the funding that this year, it'll stay in my org chart, but as of right now, we don't have plans to fill that. So there'll still be that vacancy in my org chart. So July 1st, we also have some seasonal temps that we're going to be bringing on. We have one working currently right now in parks. We're going to have another one coming on here in June that'll help also with parks and probably in water as well. And probably one later on the year that will help streets as we get into the leaf vacuuming time of year. So some of the KPIs, these are some of the things we discussed at our training, but for the members that are here tonight, if you can kind of go along, we didn't hit our marks as we did the year before. As you can see, our sweeper broke. We have ordered a new one. It should probably be here, if not this week. I mean, next week, it'll be the following week. And it's being shipped from North Carolina. So you can see that we kind of hit our marks, but we did have 3 less FTEs. Given the fact COVID, I'm not too worked up on some of these numbers. They seem to be in line with kind of the year we had. I want to kind of reflect until I get into what I'm proposing and asking for in this upcoming budget year. I kind of wanted to reflect back on some of the things that we accomplished. It was a rough year, but we did a lot of things. We moved the wastewater treatment plant project from 60%. We completed that. We got a VE study completed, and we're moving fast to 90% currently. Sankey Park playground was installed. Then we finished the concrete. We did the plaza, pass, and lighting. And as of right now, trees have been removed. And they're actually putting conduit in currently and actually have more lights in on the other side as of today. On the system development charges, I want to give Blair and his department credit on that. We kind of picked up the first part, got our projects in order, and then we turned it over to Blair, and they kind of saw it through the hearing process, and that was a big thing for the town. It's a big thing, and you guys should be applaud yourselves for that. I think that'll help our rates and things down the road. Streets overlay project, chip seal, we did 29th, and as you're aware that we awarded last council meeting, we awarded phase 2, which is actually going to probably pavement. It's going to hit down in a couple weeks. We also, phase 2 was RFP was issued. So that's out to bid currently. We also did a new engineer record. We did one originally. It was a 1-year contract. With a 3-year extension with Murray Smith, we did not extend that. So we put it back out, and we have a new engineer record. They have kind of assembled a team. We have hit the ground running with our streets projects. They are currently working on some of our small diameter projects. We also finished finally ODOT permits, and as you saw this week, we saw some street signs up in front of Safeway and another one, I think, in front of Subway. Also going, we will be at 90% final design right now at the VFD backwash at our water treatment plant. Our hopes is to have that contract out in the next couple months and finish construction by fall. We have completed the water system modeling, at least the first population of that database. There is some information that's coming out of that regarding static flows and normal pressures. We had a long year with Jacobs, and as we talked about, we're taking over those operations. We've hired already 5 new staff members, or we're working towards 5 new staff members. The new highway entrance signs, if you haven't noticed those, we completed the one out at Shea Point, and then we have the one over at Clover. We took the old signs down and put a new, more modern, they'll last for a long time, high visibility. We're working on fixing the lighting for those currently. We constructed 2 admin offices as well during the off season. So water distribution. Kind of going into what I'm asking for this year. We're going to continue working on our small diameter mains up in the avenues. We have about 5 miles of piping that needs to be replaced. They could be small 1-inch, but the majority of them are 2-inch, old steel, galvanized. Until we get too far down the road, we want to complete our water master plan. That water master plan is going to take 2 years, so I'm asking for half of it this year, and then we'll roll over into the following year to complete that plan. The master plan will really help us decide what pipe's going to go where, when, how. Our reservoir that we've isolated that was leaking when I got here, you know, do we rehab that? Do we put it somewhere else? Does development require us to put something else somewhere? And so that master plan is extremely important before we start just putting all kinds of pipe in the ground. We know we have a need to fix our pipes, but we need to be strategic about how we do that. Another thing that you'll see in our water distribution side, and I think this is in operation materials and supplies, right? This is where we buy our widgets, our pipe, stuff to hook houses up to our water system, valves. This is where we get our meters as well. And we've had long discussions about the inaccuracies of our meters. We're losing about anywhere from about 8 to 10 a month that are dying. When those die, we lose revenue. When they get old, they become inaccurate. It would be like you go into the grocery store and putting something on a scale and you're paying whatever it tells you. We need to replace these on a periodic table. I think we need to, the meters we have now need to be replaced every 10 years. The ones we're currently looking at are a different technology. They last 20 years. They are about the same cost. but there are devices we can put on them for a little bit longer, for a little bit more money. And we can strategically place those within the system, and those meters will then tell us if there's a leak on our system, not as well as the customer. So just a lot more advanced technology that's coming out of some of the meters. They read extremely low flows on homes. So if a house has a leak where our current meters may not pick up that low flow, so basically that's water that's not getting counted. And so this is an important project that not only that we fix our revenue source, our meters, but we stabilize how our revenue is in relationship to our meters. So at the treatment plant, this is the other side of the coin on, you've got your distribution system, now you've got the treatment side. Before on this section, we'd write, I think it was like $570,000 check to Jacobs, and we'd put it in professional services. Now we've had to take that based off information that we brought to you before, and we're going to have to populate our budget, and that's what we did this year. You'll see increases in, like for on the water side, you'll see increases for lab services and professional services. On the wastewater side, you'll see lab services, but you also see sludge hauling. You'll see increases for electricity for the water treatment plant. You'll see a line item for electricity, which was actually lowered to 71,000, not 71,000. So there's, you'll see now populated line items. Now, the thing is this, we haven't dealt with this side of the budget for a long time. We've just thrown a number and wrote a check. And so every year we should get better and better with our budget side on the water treatment and on the wastewater side. Right now, we know that we're probably going to spend about as much as we're paying Jacobs because we know we have some capital that we have to invest in our treatment systems this year, whether it's for laboratory chemicals and things, but tools, vehicles. But we feel going into the next year after that and so on that we're going to be able to have a savings. And we've discussed those savings in past meetings. So some of the projects that we want to continue at the water treatment plant for this year on capital side, we're going to continue the VFD backwash. We're almost done with design. We're going to finish here probably in the next 6-7 months. I would say at least the first half of the fiscal year. We want to start over a 3-year period fixing our trains. We have 3 trains, treatment systems that filter out our water from the lake. There is a recirculation system underneath that takes sludge out and then brings it back up to the top that helps help collect other sludge easier. So then it flocculates out even quicker. That's kind of the best way I can explain it. Those aren't working right. We identified that was one of the main things that weren't working when we audited the water treatment plant. And so each one of these trains needs to work. It's in a very important part of these treatment systems because without having the recirculation in the wintertime, it makes it extremely hard for us to treat very turbid water, if that makes sense. If you knew, we had discussions this year about, we got very close in our reservoirs getting down very low, and it was because they could not use that system properly. And so this is one thing that we want to fix right away. And so I'm recommending we do 1 a year over the next 3 years. The current stream monitors are basically some of the things that we talked about, turbidity, different things like that, that allow the system to operate automatically without the oversight of somebody pushing a button. We get everything talking, we get it populated. Those streams will allow us to feed chemicals at a flow rate as the plant changes. Our chemical doses can change with that. That's about the best way I can explain that, right? More or less. He always looks at me. Again, we got the water master plan I just talked about. It's going to be a 2-year project. We're going to start it this year. We're going to finish the following year. And also our fluoride system at the plant has been intermittent for about 2 years. It is getting worse. It needs a lot of help, not only in the controllers, but in the feeding station. And so we're recommending that be replaced at 86,000. Now, to keep that in perspective, that is a directive from council to feed fluoride into our system. And I don't want to go back in time and have that discussion over again, but just know that I think it's a cost of about under $10,000 to operate that system annually. And it costs a lot of money to keep it going. So I just wanted to point that out to you guys. A lot of health benefits, right? We don't need to go back and hash science, but we're going to have to spend money to keep that system operational. Wastewater collections, not a whole lot going on. Everything's going to be focused at the wastewater treatment plant. We have a project to replace manholes because we have old manholes that leak a lot of water. We try to grout seal some of those. Where we've used this money in the past, if I go back one slide, we actually put in a section of sewer line for to accommodate some homes being built. We also took out of service when we did this a old manhole that was surcharging and overflowing sewage every year to the river. And so we actually, by putting in a new line, we were able to stop sewage from going in the creek annually. So it was something that we needed to do. But that little bit of money allows us to do stuff like that on an annual basis. Water treatment plant. We've been talking about this on and on. We are at 60%. We've had recent meetings with our funding sources, DEQ and USDA. Those are going extremely well. We are currently seeking review from DEQ to get permission to then build this plant. In other words, we want them to be on board with the project. And so we're hoping to get that back sooner than later. When we can get those back, it's going to be a quick march to 90%. We're looking by the end of the year, having bidding documents and a contractor on board by after the first of the year. With that said, we still are proposing $5.255 million for the actual project and another little over $500,000 for construction services. And that'll be the first year of getting this into construction. Stormwater. I think we still have more discussions on this. I think we have rate discussions based off, there's just not any money in this fund. We want to do a stormwater master plan. We need to know where to put the pipe. We have never done anything like this. We know we have issues in town. We were challenged this year. But with that, we know we don't have a good funding source to actually start fixing a lot of these things. And so that's one project I have in here. That's a stormwater plan. It's pending discussions, I would imagine, in the upcoming council meeting. Parks, Blair already hit all those. We're just finishing the lower Sankey Park. Funding will dictate then going up to upper and wind and everything that we're going to be doing. But I'd have to give props to public works staff, Dominic Baloney, Kevin Makeson, all the other staff that's been working on this project. I mean, Angie and Kid, Joe in the designs, everybody has done an outstanding job. Volunteers from the community, I won't say who they are, but there's people that have cared about this part, and you can see it if you go out there. Streets, we talked about those. We did a chip seal on 29th this year. We brought back phase 1, which is ready to go out for construction in the next couple weeks. We've got phase 2 out for bid right now. We're hoping to take advantage of that and get everything done this summer. We've got $600,000 we're going to get roughly from the ODOT exchange program, which we talked about. That's about, we get 94 cents on the dollar, and it's our money. It's federal money that we can put right onto our roads. We also are budgeting for this, the highway project for the sidewalks going out to 54th to Riggs Hill. This is just something that's in my budget. I haven't really been involved with, but I know we talk about it all the time. So more to come. We've at least got a line item. At least we can be responsible for our section when it happens. Well, so the end of my presentation is equipment. And next on our list is one of the biggest pieces of equipment we have. I wasn't planning on bringing this to you guys this year. I was really going to kick that can down the road because you guys have been truly grateful to us. And I know Brandon's going to chime in here any minute. This Vactor is old. It's 30 years old. We're creeping up on 30 years. We bought it, 13 years ago for 27. We've been having to do a lot of welding on the frame. It still works. It's operational. There's corrosion in the storage tank. If you get a hole in the storage tank, it's like your vacuum cleaner bag broke. It doesn't work anymore. We use it daily, water, sewer, storm. It gets used probably as much or more than our backhoes. We've got some issues that occurred with this piece of equipment recently. There was an aftermarket device put on it that helps us with excavation, and it was a piece of equipment that is sold from the manufacturer, and it was put on aftermarket or after the fact. And we had an employee injured, and we've now taken that portion out of service temporarily until we do a couple of things. But this vehicle's old, 30 years. It still works good. We're going to use it every day. It was out again today. I don't want to come back to you guys in the middle of a budget and say I need $400,000 or $200,000 for a used one. I was told to put it in it because the funding's there now. We should probably buy it before we get into the wastewater plant because the wastewater side will pay for a large portion of this. But it's up for discussion. It is in my budget. And this is, I think, my last slide. I think we're getting a couple other vehicles through Enterprise, which are kind of already been in negotiations to spec them out. And so those will be exchanging, I believe, one other vehicle that we're actually going to make some money on. It's one of our first ones we'll make money on. So with that, I'm sure you guys have tons of questions. I didn't dive into the individual line items. The biggest change that you guys will see is on the water treatment side and on the wastewater treatment side, because before we just wrote a giant check. And I'm hopefully can answer any questions that you guys have. And please feel free.
So before you get to questions, for Greg's benefit, the Vactor truck, yes, was something that originally the plan was to try to kick that can down the road. It's an expensive piece of equipment, budgeted at $400,000 in this proposed budget. This is one of those budget officer discretions, which budget officer discretion then comes down this direction. But this was added to this budget because this is the best place to have this conversation. Council has regularly discussed equipment needs across the city. Since I started here as the finance director, we have done our very best to ensure that we have the equipment that we need to function correctly. And as Greg went through that slide, that what we don't want to do is continue to put together equipment that could present a liability for the city. This is a piece of equipment that has been cobbled together over time, and it works to their credit. Yes, it works and has saved a significant amount of money for the city. However, it's at the point now where that piece of equipment is beginning to fail. And if we wait, we may lose the opportunity that we have put into this budget now. The funding exists in the next fiscal year. Certainly, if this committee decides that this is not the best time to do that, then that is the prerogative of the committee to make changes to this proposed budget before it goes to approval. But we felt like this was the best place to have that conversation. So it's why it's in your proposed budget. You can see the dollars are there. And this one wasn't all on Greg.
Well, I have some personal experience with that back truck. at the time that the city of Lebanon decided to buy a new vac truck and sell that one, the Lynn County Road Department looked at that vac truck and we decided to pass it up because it just wasn't that good a machine. When you mentioned $400,000, that surprised me because, you know, I figured it'd be more than that now. But that vac truck is a tool that the city absolutely needs. And the one that they use now was not in good shape when it was purchased. So I would vote to get one.
If you had a piece of equipment that you used about once every blue moon, I would sit there and be discussing on that. Let's talk about it. But when you use a piece of equipment every day, I don't think this is even a discussion. That's my opinion. I think we need to move forward and get that piece of equipment. That is my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
I got a photograph this weekend of an injury that didn't sit well with me all weekend. So we dodged a bullet this last week, and I say that with a little bit of water in my eyes. But the picture I saw scared me. You're dealing with pressures over 1,500 to 2,000 pounds PSI. When something grenades, whatever's in that PSI's path, it's going to take. And that's kind of what happened. Fortunately, the individual only sustained, I would say, extreme bruising. So water pressure did that. So.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Mhm.
I'm not too aware with what the vac truck does. Can you explain? The
Absolutely.
services that provides?
So a vac truck is what they call a hydraulic cleaner, or what they call combination unit. It's basically a giant chassis, like a truck chassis. It has a high output pump on the front of that truck that is hooked to a hose reel. And so they can take water in a tank and compress it through that pump up to 2,000 PSI. So when you put that hose in that line and you turn the pressures up, it then charges that hose. You release hydraulics, that hose will then travel up that sewer line and goes to the next manhole until you stop that lever with the hose spraying. Then you reel it back. But that spray is such a high pressure spray that it scours your sewer lines, grease, hair. It'll tear 2-inch sticks, roots. It'll rip them right off. It'll move boulders right down to your manhole, so then you can suck them up with the giant tube that then comes over the top, and then you snorkel that up. You know, in today's sewer lines, you don't have ability to just send somebody up in there and clean it. And so when we get plugged lines, old school, they used to do what they call ball, or, you know, they put a ball upstream and they hook it to a cable. And so there's so much flow behind it that ball goes down and it slowly pushes all the material down to the next manhole. That's how they used to do it. Now you have these trucks that you can just pull up to a manhole, shoot that line up the river or up the line, you have all the pressures, and then be able to scour it and clean everything back. Extremely efficient. 2 people can clean 7,000 feet in a day. You can also move boulders. So if a bowling ball was put in a sewer or storm drain, or tricycles or 2x4s, which we had this year, that machine was able to cut through all that stuff and pull chunks out and get it out. And that's what it does for us.
It had drum sets and saxophones as well in your sewer system. So we didn't play them. No.
So it's necessary for the operation of the city with our sewer lines and our
Storm drain, storm.
water and our Are those two things what it's used for?
And we also use it for excavation for all of our water utilities, sewer lines, and especially in areas of streets where we have communication fiber optic. Instead of taking a backhoe and ripping out fiber optic for I don't know how many people and being responsible for that, we can then go in and surgically wash the water away from other pipes, expose everything, and suck the dirt out around. That's how we use it on the water side.
So just last question, if we didn't have this vac truck, would we have to get contract services from somebody else, and how expensive would that be?
It would be extremely expensive. I don't know what a rental would be, but usually a lot of people aren't just going to give you a Vactor. They're usually going to get a body with it. $3,500 a day. So we just looked to see if we could get a different one to do some work at the water treatment plant, not use our Vactor. We want to help with the scum recirculation pumps and put some new sand in. And I asked Stephen to get a quote on that. And so that kind of gives you an idea of what a day and an operator costs. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was part of the council the day when we bought that, and from Lebanon, there was a major discussion about buying it from Lebanon, but we took the conservative road at the time. We still thought, not sure about this piece of equipment, how much of use we'd get, and we just took the conservative road back at the day. We got a good deal from Lebanon, but on the same token, weren't sure about what this thing did. Being a little naive as a council, not knowing. So we did take a conservative approach. So I would say we want to be careful we don't take too conservative approach on this piece of equipment, because I was part of that when we evaluated that and looked at how it operated and what it did. And you're exactly correct. Some people can get hurt pretty quick, pretty fast. And so $400,000, if somebody gets hurt or killed, that's just, yeah, I'm telling you. So I know that this, if you're getting it for $400,000, you're getting a good deal. But I want to make sure that people understand that don't get too conservative on this piece of equipment, because
it's
back in the day. And
it is the biggest piece of equipment that we use throughout all of our divisions. Like again, stormwater, and even like we got to expose something in a park. The Vactor comes and we'll go out there and expose it for the park. I mean, it's so versatile. I mean, we're, like I said, using it for excavations, cleaning sewer lines, cleaning storm drains, sucking material out of ditches and manhole structures. We also use it at the treatment plant when asked by Jacobs, and I know Stephen will have plans to use it as well for when we clean out vaults and our aeration basins and clarifiers. We already get calls from Jacobs a couple times a year to already come out and do that work there as well. So it's not a piece of equipment that's going to see sitting in the garage at all.
The only other thing I would add too is this is a piece of equipment that the city will purchase, that this isn't going to be sold in 5 or 7 years. This is a piece of equipment that will last 20, 30 years. The existing Vactor is a 1992 model, purchased new, I think, probably likely by the city of Lebanon, and then sold to us, and it's still operating. So this is not something that we will purchase and flip, so to speak. This is a long-term purchase for us.
I think we bought that in November 2008, and we've had it since then. So we've had it 12, 13 years. And welds are, Tommy's already been on it, put some welds on frames and stuff. So
you must have some good maintenance people.
I like Tommy. Yeah, he's good.
So, Mr. Chairman, if we were to rent this, as what Stephen said, it would cost us $1 million a year to rent this piece of equipment.
And if you do the
Sound
math,
like
400,000 over, 20 years, just take the 20-year mark. This is what I did in California. I ran wastewater crews. I had 7 Vactors, 3 sewer cameras, 2 backhoes. I mean, we did everything. I was buying a Vactor about every other year. We were keeping them about 12 years. We made a shift to keep them 15 to 18 to try to really push out the maintenance. When I first got here and I saw how old that Vactor was, I was a little concerned, but it wasn't being used as much when I first got here. Now it's really, it's being used, and it's only going to get worse as we use it. But my point being is that I get accustomed to replacing them every 15 years. we could easily go 20 here with the amount of miles that are in this community. As long as the rubber and the metals hold together, we're not losing vacuum in our tanks. This piece of equipment can work a long time, at least 20 years.
Well, like I say, when we bought it back then, I had some questions about its condition then. But we figured, how much are we gonna use it? We could not really get an honest assessment as to how much we'd use it. And we looked at the price and okay, but again, today I know we use it quite a bit, so.
Well,
I think it's
I'll
worth
be
it.
honest with you. There was a culture that I was fighting here and how they were cleaning sewer lines. I was a sewer professional, so I took it, it'd be like Ray telling me about parks, right? I took that very personal how they use it, and I wanted it to be used a certain way. And matter of fact, I wanted it to be used in such a way that I sold the flushing truck because I didn't want them to flush anymore. It costs twice as much in water. It's just a whole nother, it's old school. And so where you surplus that piece of equipment, you know, 2 people can go out and clean, like I said, in a half a day, they can 5,000 feet very easy. And anyway, that Vector, we got our money out of it. 13 years, we paid 27,000. The city got their money out of that Vector.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to talk to another piece of equipment you bought a couple of years ago that surprised me. And it's, you can't put a number on how much it saves us, but that Bobcat with all those
Tool cat.
things, I mean, they're using them to put those stumps out right now. And this thing, it seems like a lot of money, and it is. But when you consider where we were and where we've been this last 4 years, it's been a pretty big deal. The
That
things that we've been able to do.
$80,000 tool cat, and that was with all like 7, 8 attachments.
Mhm.
Has done all the stumps. It has put in all the trenching for our irrigation. It's done all the trenching for our lights. It has worked in alongside the excavator in doing all the paths. It worked out there to get the playground. So you see what we've done in that park. We are getting our money out of that piece of equipment in that park.
Well, I think we're pretty much all agreed that it's a good idea to replace that back truck. Don't you think?
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
My guys will really appreciate it. Well, it's still got to get approved.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
Actually, I have a question.
Okay.
So, I don't know, in your water master plan, I don't know exactly, are you talking specifically where to put lines or what? Is there anything in the master plan that would talk about if we had a drought, what we're going to do about that? Or is that just something else that we have to think about?
Yeah, excuse me.
We're dealing with that with the WIA study right now. We're specifically talking about drought and what the city will do to mitigate. We're putting together a report right now that'll help with that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
We're doing a WIA study for the federal government right now with our treatment facilities, and we're specifically talking about drought and how the plant would mitigate it and how everything will work. So we're doing that in some respect right now.
Okay, thank you.
Now, when he throws the acronym of WIA, it's American Water Infrastructure Act. A lot of that is they're looking at water infrastructure and protecting themselves. When we talk about Florida, people tap it into the SCADA system, taking control. This is part of what we're required to do for funding and other things. And so we have to meet this first phase, I think, within the next couple months, but we're already actively working on it. So when he talks about that, that's what it's in relationship to.
Any other questions? Then I think we're finished.
As a general reminder, next Thursday, a week from today, is the second meeting. The police department, executive and legislative department, and the library will be the presentations for the night. If time permits, we can look at budget approval, and if you're comfortable, otherwise we will hold the meeting on the 18th as well, the following Tuesday. So I will see you all next Thursday, 6 o'clock.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, great.